Every morning, before the city stirred to life, he was already there, curled under the chipped stone awning of the old hardware store. Wrapped in a patchwork of torn coats and faded blankets, the man sat in silence, not asking for anything, not bothering anyone, just present, like a statue with breath. People walked past him the way they walked past the rusted lamppost or the crack in the pavement, with practiced disregard. He didn't speak. He barely moved. But every day he was there. Same spot, same time, like a fixture in the background of a place no one truly noticed. No one knew his name. Not really. The teens called him Old Jacket for the stained military-style coat he always wore, 3 sizes too big, missing a button, the collar frayed. The deli guy called him Quiet George, though no one ever confirmed that was his name. To most, he was just the man on 5th and Main. He never begged, never held a sign, never made a sound unless spoken to, and even then, just a nod, maybe a hoarse "thank you," if someone left a sandwich or coffee on the ledge by his feet. He was invisible by design, and that's what made his disappearance so strange. It was Ava who noticed first. She wasn't one of the people who ignored him, not completely. She passed him every weekday on her way to the school where she worked as a part-time administrator. She wasn't the type to make conversation. She respected the barrier he seemed to keep, but she always brought him something warm when the mornings dipped below freezing. A cinnamon roll, a sealed bottle of water, once a weathered book of poetry she found in a donation box. Sometimes he nodded, once he smiled. So when she passed the corner and the spot was empty, her stride faltered, a moment's pause, then a longer look. No blanket, no man, just the stained outline where he used to sit, a mark on the wall like a shadow that had been scrubbed away. It was day 1. By day 3, Ava asked the coffee vendor across the street if he'd seen him. "Nope," the guy said, shaking his head as he frothed milk. "Weird, huh? He's like part of the sidewalk, gone now." By day 5, a few regulars had started murmuring. Maybe the city moved him, someone said. Hospital, maybe. Or jail. No one really knew. No one really cared. At least not outwardly. But Ava, she felt something shift. It wasn't just absence. It was silence. An interruption in a pattern so steady it had become part of her own rhythm, and the silence began to echo. Then came day 7. It was cold. Unusually so for late fall. The wind had that whisper of winter in it, the kind that slices through your sleeves and makes your bones feel older than they are. Ava crossed 5th and Main, eyes scanning the familiar spot. And this time, he was there. Same coat, same posture, same fixed gaze into nothing, as if he'd never left, but something was different. He sat straighter, his eyes sharper, the shuffle in his hands, always restless, always folding and unfolding that threadbare cloth, had stilled. There was a calm about him, not peace, something else. Like he knew something no one else did. Ava slowed. She placed a sealed coffee on the ledge by his feet. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He looked up, really looked, for the first time. His eyes met hers, not glassy or vague, but focused, clear, penetrating. Then he said it, his voice dry but steady. "I remember now." That night, Ava couldn't sleep. What did he mean? She searched local hospital records. Nothing. Shelters? No check-ins matching his description. She even went by the police precinct, feigning a concern about a missing relative, but came up empty. He had vanished and returned, changed, and now he remembered. What? The next morning she passed by again. He was there, same spot. But now he wore something new, a narrow leather cord around his neck. Attached was a small rusted medallion, round, engraved. She couldn't read it clearly, not from where she stood, but it caught the light, and the look in his eyes was no longer vacant. Across town, an older man reading the morning paper nearly choked on his coffee when he saw a tiny photo in the obituaries. It wasn't the homeless man, not directly. It was someone else, a name that hadn't appeared in print in decades. But the man in the picture, younger, cleaner, in a suit, had the same eyes. The caption read, "Funeral held in absence for dissident leader declared dead in 1991. The date of the photo? 1984, and in the background, blurred but visible, stood a man in a military coat, watching. The mornings on Fulton Street had a rhythm, slow, quiet, and mostly predictable. At 6:43 a.m., the bus would groan its way to the corner. By 7:10, the bakery opened its shutters with a clatter, and by 7:30, without fail, he was there. The man had no name that anyone knew. People just called him Old Ray, though no one remembered who first gave him that name. He sat on a square of cardboard under the broken awning of the vacant hardware store, his back against the bricks, legs drawn in, a wool cap pulled low over his eyebrows. Some days he hummed, some days he didn't, but he was always there. Part of the scenery, part of the silence. Until he wasn't. It was a Thursday when someone noticed. Linda, who ran the newsstand across the street, tilted her head as she arranged her magazines and muttered, "Weird." She checked her phone. 7:35 a.m. Still no Ray. Maybe he was late. Maybe someone had moved him along. The police had tried that before. But by noon, the cardboard lay empty, undisturbed, with the same crumpled edges and a faint imprint where his coat had pressed into it for months. That night it rained. The next day, the space remained empty. The bakery girl, Jess, walked a little slower past the spot. Linda mentioned it to a customer. A man in a navy coat said he'd seen Ray at the pier once. Maybe he'd gone back there. But even he didn't sound convinced. By Saturday, a strange unease had taken hold of the block. The space where Ray used to sit began to draw more attention in his absence than it ever had in his presence. People glanced toward it as if expecting a note, a sign, some explanation. None came. Then they began to talk, rumors and whispers. Some said he'd been taken. Others whispered he had family, a long-lost brother who came for him in a silver Buick. A girl swore she'd seen Ray dressed in a suit, standing at the bus stop 2 blocks away, looking different, like he had somewhere to be. None of these stories matched. None had proof. But still, the stories spread, because silence demands an answer, and Ray had left only silence behind. Linda, the newsstand woman, found herself thinking about him more than she liked to admit. She'd given him her extra papers for years, sometimes a croissant. Once, in December, she handed him a scarf. He took it, nodded, and tucked it away like it was made of gold. She never saw him wear it. She wondered now if that moment meant something. An empty space speaks. It's a strange thing. The absence of someone you never thought you cared about. It leaves a noise in your thoughts, an echo of what should be there, and in the stillness of that corner, people began to look inward. If Ray could disappear, so could anyone. No one called the police. What would they even report? A man with no address, no surname, no voice on record. Gone. Just gone. Jess, the bakery girl, started leaving a coffee on the edge of the sidewalk each morning. Black, no sugar. Just the way he liked it. Or so she thought. The cup stayed there, growing colder with each passing hour. On the 7th day, the cup was empty. He came back. The 8th morning dawned colder than most. A thin frost had kissed the edges of the metal trash bins, and the wind bit harder than usual. Linda arrived late, her hands stiff in her gloves. She glanced across the street and dropped her keys. Ray was back. Same cardboard, same coat, same knit cap. But it wasn't the same Ray. His posture was straighter. His eyes, usually unfocused, distant, as if watching a memory only he could see, were sharp, alert. They followed people as they passed, not with suspicion, but with awareness. His hands, always tucked away and trembling, were now still, resting on his knees with the quiet control of a man who had just returned from somewhere important. Linda stared at him for a long moment. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked back at her. And in that look was something unfamiliar. Authority. Something had changed. Jess ran across the street, holding a fresh cup of coffee. She knelt by him, placed it at his feet, and asked, "You okay?" Ray said nothing at first. Then, without looking at the cup, he murmured, "Thank you, Jessica." She froze. He had never used her name before. Never said more than a or thank you in a gravel voice. But now his tone was crisp, clear, intentional. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. Ray looked up. His eyes met hers fully, directly. "I pay attention." That was all. She stood, heart racing, and backed away slowly, not because he scared her, but because something inside her shifted, like she'd just met someone new wearing the face of someone old. The street reacts. Throughout the day, people noticed. Ray didn't sleep. He didn't mumble to himself. He sat with the poise of someone who no longer belonged to the ground beneath him, a man who, for some reason, had returned from a place far removed from sidewalks and rain. By evening, a stranger approached him, tall, dark coat, scar above his brow. He leaned in, whispered something. Ray didn't move. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and handed the man something small, barely visible. The man nodded, stood, and left. The interaction lasted under 5 seconds, but Linda saw it, and so did a teenager filming from behind a bench across the street. By nightfall, the video was online, titled "Mysterious Exchange with Homeless Man." It gathered 4,000 views by midnight. By morning, 32,000. And Ray, he was gone again, but only for a day. A new pattern. From that point on, Ray began to appear and disappear in a rhythm no one could predict. Some days he sat at the usual corner. Others he was spotted in other parts of the city, never begging, never lost, just observing, watching, interacting with strangers who never stayed long. One woman swore he gave her a folded piece of paper. Another said he told her to change her route home, and when she did, she avoided a pileup that killed 3 people. Each story grew more surreal. Each day, more eyes turned to Ray, and still, no one knew who he was. But they were starting to ask. When Ray appeared again at the corner of 5th and Cedar, something about him was off. Not wrong, not unstable, just different. His coat was the same, patched and oversized, his boots still worn through at the sole. But his eyes, those dull, wandering eyes everyone had learned to ignore, now carried focus, direction, like he had seen something during that missing week and had come back with purpose. He no longer mumbled to himself. He walked deliberately now, measured steps, no longer the shuffled drift of someone waiting for nothing. Most telling of all, he stopped begging. Instead, he began drawing. He'd sit with his back to the red brick wall of Harper's grocery, knees pulled up, a battered notebook in hand. His fingers, smudged with charcoal and ink, moved with calm intensity. The drawings didn't look like much at first, just squiggles, blocks, X's, strange geometric forms, until Ava looked closer. Ava Mitchell, who ran the local bookstore 2 blocks down, had passed by Ray every morning for years. Sometimes she'd leave him a bagel or a half-used book of crossword puzzles. He rarely reacted beyond a quiet nod, but this time she paused. He was sketching a map, not a cartoon, not a fantasy. A precise topographic style layout of something, maybe a facility, an estate. There were clear corridors, rooms labeled with symbols, and what looked like elevation notations in the margins. Ava crouched down beside him. "Ray?" she said, her voice low and curious. He didn't look up. "Do you know what this is?" he asked quietly. She glanced again. "Some kind of blueprint?" He chuckled, but it sounded more sad than amused. They left the door open. That's all. I walked in. Her breath caught. What do you mean? Still not meeting her eyes, Ray flipped the page. Another diagram. This one more chaotic. Scratches, arrows, and something like coordinates along the side. No cameras, no guards. Just a moment, that's all I had. He finally looked up at her, and Ava saw the truth in his gaze. He hadn't just wandered off for a week. He had gone somewhere very specific, somewhere important. And now he was trying to remember it all, before it disappeared again. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She kept seeing those drawings, the symbols, the geometry that didn't resemble any city building or familiar location. She even Googled the shapes, searching through floor plans of hospitals, abandoned military sites, and Cold War bunkers. Nothing matched. But Ray kept drawing. Each day a new map, sometimes a section, sometimes the full layout. Eventually he stopped speaking altogether, immersed in his work like a man racing against a fading memory. The locals started whispering. Some thought Ray had gone further off the deep end. Others said he might be an artist or a former engineer who had finally cracked. But Ava sensed something more. The details were too intricate, the symbols too consistent. One day, she brought him a real map of the state. "Can you point?" she asked. Ray looked down. Then, slowly, with a trembling finger, he tapped a spot. Not a city, not a road, just dense forest west of Millersburg. No towns for miles, just trees and old government property no longer listed. She traced it with her finger. "You went there?" Ray nodded. "I didn't mean to, but I think someone meant for me to." Ava made copies of his drawings. She pinned them up behind the counter in her bookstore's back room, comparing each page, aligning the corridors, the symbols. One drawing in particular caught her eye. It wasn't a map. It was a person, a face, rough and shaded, but clearly sketched with care. A man in a uniform, military style but unmarked, the kind of anonymous figure you'd see in grainy intelligence photos from the 80s. She asked Ray who it was. He looked down again, silent for a moment. Then he asked me if I remembered. I didn't, but I do now. Bits of it. Ava's hands shook. "You knew him?" Ray's voice dropped to a whisper. "He knew me." By the end of the week, Ava brought in someone else. Her cousin Jacob worked for a non-profit specializing in veterans with PTSD. He had a background in military cartography. When he saw the drawings, he froze. "These aren't just maps," Jacob said. "They're internal schematics. This is defense-grade architecture." He tapped one of the pages. "This layout here, it's consistent with a decommissioned Cold War listening post, but these details, sealed rooms, power conduits, venting systems, those were never public." Ava stared at him. "So he's not just imagining this?" Jacob shook his head. "No, he's remembering. Somehow." They turned to Ray. He looked smaller than usual, curled in his blanket, drawings scattered around him like puzzle pieces, but his eyes were clear. Jacob crouched. "Ray, who were you before all this?" Ray blinked. Then, very quietly, he replied, "That's what they don't want me to remember." From that day on, Ray was never alone on the corner. People came, some to gawk, others to bring food or ask questions, but mostly they came for the drawings. Ava started documenting them, photographing, scanning, creating a file. A local podcast got wind of it and interviewed her. The story reached a niche history forum online. Then one day, a man in a suit approached the bookstore. He didn't give a name, but he asked to see the drawings. When Ava refused, he left a card. It bore no title, just a number and an insignia she didn't recognize, something like a falcon inside a triangle. Ray refused to speak the rest of the day. He just circled something on one of the maps, a room. He wrote 3 words beside it. Where it started. The clinic sat on the edge of town, where the highway met the fields, and no one bothered to look twice. It wasn't on any maps. No sign marked its entrance, just a narrow asphalt road that disappeared behind tall hedges and led to a building that looked more like an abandoned lodge than any medical facility. The kind of place people forgot existed, or wanted to forget. Tom hadn't spoken much since he returned, but something about the way he looked at the world now, the eyes, the posture, the silent restraint, made Ava feel like he was remembering everything. It was Ava who found the clue. She had been following the vague details Tom mumbled in half-sleep. A woman in white, a hallway that smelled like antiseptic, and something sweet and a sound, metallic, rhythmic, like footsteps echoing in a long corridor. Those fragments, combined with a single piece of mail crumpled in the folds of Tom's old jacket, led her here. The envelope was blank, except for a symbol embossed in faint silver, a triangle inside a circle, almost like an emblem from a forgotten institution. As Ava approached the building, there were no guards, no reception, just silence. Dust lingered in the air as if even the breeze avoided the place. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was sterile and unnaturally quiet. Old magazines on a coffee table, a pot of artificial flowers, a couch that hadn't been sat on in years. A room preserved but not lived in. She moved carefully, her footsteps muffled by thin carpet, down a corridor lined with office doors. The windows were fogged with age. Everything smelled like time had stopped. She found the records room first. It was small and dimly lit, filled with metal filing cabinets and an old desktop computer that whirred to life after a few flickers. Ava scrolled through the patient logs, or tried to. The system was archaic, protected by multiple passwords. She didn't need to break in, because there was nothing there. No patient logs, no names, no dates, no digital footprint. It was a room filled with drawers labeled alphabetically, but each one was empty, like someone had meticulously erased every trace of what had ever happened here. That's when she heard the noise, a faint scrape followed by a soft thud somewhere deeper inside the building. She hesitated. It could have been an animal, or someone else who didn't belong. Still, Ava followed it, gripping her phone like a lifeline. The sound led her to a locked door near the back of the clinic. It looked more like a vault than anything medical, heavy, reinforced. But next to it, hanging slightly ajar, was a supply closet. Inside, cleaning supplies, gloves, and, tucked into the back, a small access panel, unscrewed. A tunnel of sorts, just wide enough to crawl through. She didn't think, she just moved. On the other side was a corridor, very different from the sterile front of the building. The walls were cement, cold and bare. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and cameras, dead or fake, dotted the ceiling. Ava's breath echoed. The air was cooler here, thicker. This wasn't a clinic, this was a bunker. Along the corridor, small rooms with locked doors. Some had mattresses, others had nothing at all. But one stood out, its door slightly open. Inside, the bed was made. The trash can had a crumpled paper cup, and on the desk, there was a folder. Inside the folder, a photo of Tom, younger with shorter hair, clean, eyes closed. He was lying on the same bed she was now standing next to. Below the photo, patient number 13, non-compliant. There were notes, dozens of them, coded phrases, sessions, reconditioning attempts. Not medical jargon, more like reports from an experimental program. Behavioral correction, cognitive disruption, memory reframing. Ava read faster. The word observation appeared again and again, and then she found the last page. It simply read, released, monitored return. Her heart thudded. She copied everything she could. Photos, notes, even the badge she found tucked inside the folder, the same triangle in circle symbol from the envelope. When she emerged from the building, the sun had already set. She locked the door behind her, though it didn't matter. What she found wasn't just about Tom. It was about whoever sent him back. Back in the city, Ava watched Tom again from her window. He was back at his usual spot, but different now. He barely spoke. He wrote small notes in a leather-bound notebook, symbols, maps, fragments of a story he hadn't yet told. That night, she sat beside him. "I found the place," she whispered. Tom looked at her. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, there were others. "Others? Like you?" He nodded. "They don't remember. Most of them, they never came back." Ava looked down at the folder in her bag. "Why did they send you back?" Tom didn't answer, not directly, but he opened his notebook and pointed to a sketch. It was a door, the same one Ava had crawled through. Above it he had written one word, redoubt. "I remembered too much," he said. Ava knew this was only the beginning. There were patterns in the way Harold now moved. Ava began to notice it first. He'd rise from the bench each morning at the same hour, adjust the straps of his worn coat as if remembering a ritual, and walk 2 blocks east, past the laundromat and into the alley behind the old theater. Every day, same time, same steps. But it wasn't just routine. There was something purposeful, controlled, almost like he was checking something. And then came the symbol. It appeared on the 3rd morning of the week, drawn in chalk behind the dumpster, a triangle with a slash through the center. Not graffiti, not the tag of any local crew. It was too precise, too old. It looked ancient, like it belonged in a book, not a back alley. Harold saw it and stopped. For a full minute, he stared. Then he looked up toward the rooftops, nodded once and walked away. Ava watched from across the street, pretending to sip her coffee. She hadn't told anyone she was following him. Not yet. Not even Nick. There was something she needed to understand first, something beyond the surface of this changed man. She waited until Harold turned the corner, then rushed to the alley. The symbol was still fresh, a little smudged by the morning wind. She took a photo and traced it with her finger. Cold. What did it mean? That night, she showed it to her uncle, a retired history professor with an obsession for wartime codes. He squinted at the photo, frowning. "That's not random," he said. "I've seen something like it. There may be in an old dossier. Resistance markings, possibly. European. Could be post-war surveillance code used by underground networks." "But what would it be doing behind a theater in our city?" Ava asked. Her uncle leaned back, quiet. "Depends who's watching." The next day, Harold didn't follow his usual path. Instead, he wandered into the old train yard, long abandoned, rusted metal skeletons stretching into the grey morning fog. Ava hesitated, then followed, careful to stay out of view. Harold wasn't walking aimlessly. He was counting steps. Every 15 paces he paused. His eyes scanned the tracks, the broken cars, the distant signal tower. Then, behind one of the train cars, he stopped completely. Ava crouched low, holding her breath. That's when the second figure appeared. He stepped out from behind a rusted signal post, tall, dressed in a brown coat, cap pulled low. His presence was silent, but Harold didn't flinch. They nodded at each other. No words, just 2 old ghosts in a meeting. Then Harold reached into his coat and pulled out something, a folded paper, slightly yellowed. He passed it to the man. The man tucked it into his sleeve and turned away, vanishing into the mist. Ava's heart pounded. She waited a moment before approaching the train car. Harold was gone, but there, etched faintly into the metal, was the symbol again, the triangle with the slash. Only this time it was burned in, permanent. That evening she finally confronted him. "Harold," she said as he sat quietly on the bench, folding a paper bird, "what's the symbol?" He looked up, not surprised. "You saw it." She nodded. He studied her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Not everything I did was in war. Some of it was after. Cleaning up what was left. Protecting the names that would never appear in the history books." Ava sat beside him, careful not to speak. "There are still things moving in the dark," Harold continued. "I was part of a chain, the triangle. It was one of our ways to speak, to warn, to pass. When the line lights up again, when someone draws it, it means the system isn't dead. It means there's a message." "And the man?" she asked. "A courier. From before, he knew the risks, even now." "Why you?" He smiled gently. "Because I remember the codes. Because I haven't lost the eyes to see when the world starts whispering again." Later that night, Ava found herself staring at her photo of the symbol. She posted it on an obscure history forum using a pseudonym. Within hours, a user responded with coordinates, a location in Eastern Europe, a town she'd never heard of. Then a message. "The Watcher has moved. The line is live." Chills ran down her spine. Meanwhile, in the dim light of his small shelter behind the bakery, Harold unfolded another paper. This one blank on one side, but containing an address handwritten in a shaky but familiar script. He sighed. He would have to move again soon, but not before leaving one last marker. The next morning, the symbol appeared outside the old library downtown, this time carved into a stone planter. Beneath it, a date and a time. Reflections. By the end of the week, Ava began to realize that Harold was not just a changed man. He was a link in a chain much longer than anyone imagined, a chain of memory, vigilance, and unfinished promises. She no longer saw him as the corner man. He was a sentinel, a part of a network hidden beneath the surface of cities and silence, and now his watch was active again. Ava typed with her eyes glued to the screen, barely blinking. It was past midnight, and the only light in the small apartment came from the bluish glow of her laptop. Ever since she'd posted the photo of the symbol, her inbox had flooded with alerts, obscure links, encrypted files, and above all, names. Names no one dared to say out loud. Names that in official records simply didn't exist. She listed the most frequent ones in a notebook. V. Orloff, Monsieur de Carvalho, D. Kovac, the Courier, the Watcher. And next to them, one name underlined 3 times. Sentinella. She had heard that word from Harold's own lips just the day before. He'd been sitting on the ground, calmly sewing the torn sleeve of his coat. A thick iron needle, used slowly and without urgency. Sentinella, he repeated when Ava asked about the symbols. That was the name given to those who didn't sleep, the ones who kept watch when everyone else was gone. We were shadows with eyes, and that name was never spoken in public. Why not? Harold looked at her. Because names, when spoken, can be erased. That same night, Ava did something bold. Using one of the forums suggested by a mysterious contact named Galt72, she uploaded an image, the symbol, hand-drawn in charcoal, alongside a single name, Sentinella. It took less than 5 minutes. A reply appeared, simple. They were all erased, but not all are gone. Then a temporary access link to an encrypted directory. She hesitated, but clicked. What she saw would change everything. The main file was a black and white dossier titled Operazione Nebbia. Inside, photos of operations in conflict zones from the 70s and 80s, most without identified locations. In many, shadows with blurred faces, names crossed out. But in one of them, she froze. Harold, younger, wearing a dark uniform, standing next to a taller man, unshaven, wearing the same symbol around his neck on a rustic medallion. Behind them, children in shock, like they had just been pulled from a hiding place or prison camp. The symbol was carved into the wooden door behind them. The caption simply read, Safe House Bravo, 1983. Ava printed the image and ran to the square where Harold spent his mornings. He was there, eyes closed, listening to the wind like it was music. She said nothing, just handed him the image. Harold stared at it for long moments, then murmured, Vittorio still wore the medallion. Who's Vittorio? He closed his eyes. He was the last name on the list. The last before me. After he disappeared, I was the only one left. But if he's in this photo, it means he survived that mission, and no one told me. Why not? Harold sighed. Because sometimes, even among the watchers, there were silences that had to exist. Back at her apartment, Ava searched for Operazione Nebbia with every tool she had. She found fragments, old articles in forgotten newspapers, redacted UN reports, and one recurring name, Bunker 17, a secret shelter used by refugees and field agents in southern Germany near the Austrian border. According to scattered records, Bunker 17 was decommissioned in 1985, officially demolished, but the coordinates remained in old railway infrastructure files. Ava knew at that moment she'd have to go. But first, she needed to understand Harold's true role. So she asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Were you a soldier?" He shook his head. "Not in the traditional sense. I came after the battle. When everyone left, I cleaned up what remained. I scraped names off walls, burned documents, erased tracks. I was the eraser that kept the innocent from being found." "You erased stories?" "No, I prevented them from being captured." Later, while Harold slept in his makeshift shelter, Ava left an envelope beside him. Inside, copies of the Safe House Bravo image, the coded names she'd uncovered, and a handwritten note, "I'm going after the names. Someone has to remember." The next day, Harold found the envelope and smiled softly, sadly. She was walking into an ancient forest of codes, lies, and buried memories, but he knew she was strong, stronger than he had ever been. In a distant place, a red light blinked in a long-forgotten underground room. A man with an indistinct accent stared at an old monitor. A notification flashed. "Sentinella. Reactivated. Level 2. He pressed a button. On the screen beside him, the image of the symbol appeared. Below it, 2 names. H. Rowe A. Green. The network slept, but not for much longer. The sky over Berlin was grey when Ava landed. A light backpack on her shoulders and the envelope with printed files carefully tucked inside a hollowed-out book. The subway ride to Südkreuz station was clean, silent, and almost surreal. A calm that clashed with the storm of questions hammering in her mind. She wasn't there as a tourist. She was a messenger, or maybe a spy of forgotten secrets. The journey to the city of Görlitz, the old border between East Germany and Poland, was made by regional train. The landscape changed slowly, from modern buildings to dense forests and villages that seemed frozen in time. In one of the nearly empty cars, she opened the envelope again and reread the fragments of the dossier. Bunker 17, located 4.2 kilometers north of Görlitz Ost station. Approximate coordinates 51.17N, 14997E. Classification Zulu Grey. Status demolished in 1985. But recent satellite imagery, cross-referenced with old railway records, told another story. The bunker still existed, just buried. When she got off at Görlitz, Ava felt like she had stepped into an old film. The faded Soviet-era facades, abandoned tracks covered in leaves, and streets where time seemed to walk slower. At the hostel where she stayed, she pretended to be a history student researching the Cold War in peripheral regions. It worked. The elderly woman at the front desk even pointed out an old forest trail that led to a forgotten military warehouse. Exactly what Ava needed. The next morning, she followed the suggested trail. She carried only the essentials: flashlight, camera, pocket knife, map, and a bottle of water. After 2 hours of silent walking, she saw what looked like a small artificial hill covered in moss and shrubs. But something was off. One of the nearby trees had old markings, symbols carved into the bark. One of them was unmistakable, the same symbol of the Sentinellas. She cleared away dry branches and began looking for an entrance. After several minutes, she found a rusty metal hatch buried at an angle, a side access door, locked of course. Ava knelt down and inspected it. She used the pocket knife to pry the seam. A click. The lock gave. The air that escaped smelled of rust, mold, and untold stories. Inside, the bunker was larger than she had imagined. Damp concrete corridors stretched in several directions. The walls were covered with metal panels and writings in German, some faded. She used the flashlight to scan the rooms. Cots, supply crates, torn maps. And then, in a circular room at the bunker's center, she found a wall full of photographs and names, children, women, men, all with handwritten dates. Some faces were crossed out, others had only numbers. At the center of the wall, an image of a child holding a medallion with the Centinela symbol. Ava recognized the medallion. It was the same one Harold wore. In one of the rusted cabinets, Ava found a field journal written in mixed Italian and English. From the handwriting and signature, it was by Vittorio Orloff, the same name from the previous dossier. She translated some of the entries using her phone. "We left 13 behind tonight. 3 of the youngest are sick. We can't stop. Harold insists he'll go back for the others. I said there's no time, but he always goes back." The Russians sealed the line. "If Bunker 17 falls, no one will ever know we were here, that we saved those the world had forgotten." And further down, "Harold has something I lost, faith in people. Even after everything, he is the last true Centinela. I'm just an echo." Ava sat on the floor, journal in her lap, flashlight between her knees. Why weren't these names in any books? Why weren't the children saved here ever honored? And why had Harold vanished into anonymity? She understood then that it wasn't enough to tell his story. She had to uncover all the stories buried for political convenience or institutional shame. Hours later, at the hostel, Ava uploaded the files, photos, and journal excerpts to a secure site with cloud backup. File name, Dead City Project, and she shared it with only one person, an investigative journalist known for his courage, the same one who had helped expose disappearances during the military dictatorship in South America. The reply came almost instantly. "I'm in, but you need to come back. This is going to explode." Meanwhile, on another continent, Harold stood up with difficulty in his usual corner, but now something had changed. Across the street, 2 men watched. They didn't move, but carried what looked like an old briefcase. One of them muttered, "She found the bunker." The other responded, "Then he'll remember, and when that happens, all the forgotten names will come to light." The control room was cloaked in shadow, lit only by dozens of monitors, streaming real-time footage from across the world. In a back corner, a thin man with thick glasses watched a video that had yet to be released to the public. It was less than 5 minutes long, but what it held was an earthquake. On screen, a young woman with a steady gaze spoke directly into the camera. "My name is Ava Linden, and what I'm about to share with you is not a theory. It's documentation, evidence, testimony about a man the world ignored and lives saved by his silent courage." She took a breath. "His name is Harold. Maybe you've seen him on a random street corner, but before that, he was a Centinela." 48 hours earlier, Ava had rushed back to New York. The journalist she'd contacted, Marcus Terrell, was already waiting at the terminal, his expression a mix of nerves and disbelief. "Do you even realize what this is?" he asked, holding the USB drive she handed him at the airport. "I do," Ava replied firmly, "and I can't be the only one who knows." Within a day, Terrell's team, experts in cybersecurity, fact-checking, and international law, were verifying and cross-referencing every piece of data. Satellite images confirmed the location of the bunker. Testimonies buried in immigration files from the 1970s connected missing children to the Görlitz region. Even more shocking, 2 of the names from the bunker mural matched current US residents, both with mysteriously erased histories. The story was ready to explode. The reveal. The live broadcast was scheduled for a Tuesday, 8 p.m., prime time in the world of investigative journalism. The digital channel chosen, EchoSource, was small, but trusted among independent reporters and academic communities. To everyone's surprise, the live stream surpassed 100,000 views in under an hour. Shares skyrocketed. And when Harold's name appeared, alongside images of him living homeless on the streets, social media erupted. Who is Harold? Dead City Files. The Last Sentinella. Questions spread like wildfire. Who was this man, really? How did someone like him vanish from history? Why were these missions never acknowledged? And most urgently, where is he now? Meanwhile, in the city, Harold sat in the same corner, silent, still. The old radio beside him crackled. But in our next report, a young researcher claims to have uncovered proof of a clandestine humanitarian network active during the Cold War. The most mentioned name in the documents is Harold. He didn't react immediately, but his eyes, usually fixed on the pavement, lifted for a few seconds. People rushed by, heads down, phones glowing, whispers circled about. The spy, homeless guy. No one realized the man they were talking about was right there. The next morning, Ava woke up to her phone vibrating non-stop. Interview requests, messages from universities, human rights organizations demanding more information. But one notification made her freeze. Direct message from sentinella.oldprotonmail.com. Subject: You found too much. Text: Ava, there are things you still don't know. The bunker was just one of many. And not all sentinellas followed the same code. If you want to understand everything, go to Fort Greene Library, Rare Archives section, 3rd shelf, code 418H. She swallowed hard. Harold had broken his silence. The library. Ava entered Fort Greene Library as if stepping into a sacred place. It was old, dark wood shelves, the smell of aged paper in the air. In the back, the Rare Archives section was nearly empty, quiet like a mausoleum of forgotten truths. She found the indicated shelf. The number 418 was engraved on a small brass plaque. Among dusty spines, one book stood out, far too new. She pulled it. A soft click echoed. A false section of the shelf swung open, revealing a small metal box. Inside was a single object, a portable tape recorder. She pressed play. The raspy voice that emerged wasn't unfamiliar. You've gone too far, Ava. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any book, not in Dead City, not in UN files. There was a group, a breakaway faction. They infiltrated the Sentinellas. They helped, sometimes, but also risked everything we stood for. They called themselves the Black Wings. I confronted them. That's why I was erased. They're still out there. The end of one broadcast and the beginning of another. As Ava absorbed the recording, Marcus Terrell was already preparing a second expose. This time with interviews, declassified documents, and a moving clip. Harold, sitting in silence, now surrounded by people who finally recognized him. A small boy knelt in front of him and offered a drawing, an angel with black wings and a star on his chest. Harold smiled, but only said, "I'm not a hero. I just stayed when everyone else left." Brooklyn, 3 days after the broadcast. Ava woke up with the unsettling feeling of being watched. Over the past few days, the tension around her had grown in silence. Footsteps echoing behind her on empty sidewalks, disappearing notifications before she could read them, and that quiet warning at the library. The Black Wings still existed. On her bathroom mirror, scrawled with the tip of a dried-out marker, was a message. "You've seen too much. The next page is not yours." Was it a threat or a warning? The hidden past. Following clues Harold had left on the recorder, Ava launched a new investigation, this time not in public archives, but in the underground. She contacted a former intelligence officer now working as an academic consultant, alias Eli Markham. He agreed to meet at a crumbling cafe in Queens. Eli got straight to the point. The Blackwings weren't just dissidents. They were a cell within the cell. Officers who claimed to be sentinels but used the humanitarian network to traffic information and sometimes people. People. Ava swallowed hard. Specialists, scientists, children with exceptional abilities, anyone valuable to a new regime. He pulled out an old photo. In it, a young Harold was caught mid-argument with a man in a dark suit and smoke-colored eyes. On the back of the picture, C. Malinoff. That was the link, Eli said. The agent who tried to recruit Harold into the Black Wings. When Harold refused, he was erased. Harold's return. That same night, Ava found a note slipped under her door. Go to the Memorial Garden at 3 a.m. Come alone. H. She hesitated, then went. The park was empty, save for a lone figure sitting on a stone bench. Harold, wrapped in an old blanket, but his eyes clearer than ever. You've uncovered more than I wanted, he said without ceremony. But less than you need. Who are they now? Ava asked. Are they still operating? Harold nodded. They're in banks, boards, international aid departments. The name has changed. The Wings haven't. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a newspaper clipping, a photo from a global refugee forum. One of the keynote speakers was the same man from the old photo. Malinoff, now going by Christian Malin, was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar social development NGO. Harold touched the paper gently. He destroyed lives, bought silence, buried cities. And in a barely audible voice he added, and he still smiles for the cameras. A dangerous plan. In the days that followed, Ava and Marcus drafted a new exposé, this time with a clear target. Marlin. The video would draw a straight line between the Black Wings of the past and their current power. But Marcus hesitated. This isn't journalism anymore. This could put you in the sights of people who topple governments. I know, Ava replied. But if I back down now, everything Harold endured will mean nothing. With help from an activist hacker who went by Keo, Ava uncovered more evidence. Encrypted communications between members of the NGO and weapons contractors. Recruitment reports with Cold War-era codes. Everything converged. The horror hadn't stayed in the past. It had just put on a tie. The ambush. 2 days before the video's release, Ava received another note. He knows. Leave the city. H. Hours later, Marcus was kidnapped by masked men. His car was found abandoned on the Manhattan Bridge. The laptop was destroyed. But Ava didn't break. She knew she was alone now, and that the next step would be the most dangerous. The encounter with Malin. In a bold move, Ava attended the Global Forum, where Malin was scheduled to speak. Using a fake press credential, she infiltrated the venue, armed with a hidden recorder and a micro camera embedded in her brooch. After Malin's speech on global humanitarian dignity, Ava approached him. Mr. Malin, may I ask you a question? She said, voice steady. He smiled politely. Of course, young lady. Do you remember Görlitz, the cave, the boy who refused to kill in the name of progress? For a brief second, his smile vanished. His eyes flickered. Then he responded, Some ghosts should stay buried, Ms. Linden. And he walked away, flanked by security guards. But the camera was still rolling. The final recording, using the data recovered by Keo and the footage from her encounter with Malin, Ava prepared the riskiest video of her life. In it, beyond the historical timeline of the Black Wings, was the veiled but chilling confrontation. Malin indirectly acknowledging his dark past. The video title, The Man Who Almost Erased Harold. It premiered at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. By 3 a.m., it had surpassed 2 million views. By dawn, Malin had shut down all NGO communications, and Harold, had vanished once again. A final signal. In Ava's mailbox, a plain brown envelope arrived. Inside, a map with coordinates and a single sentence. The last shelter still stands, and the children he saved want to meet you. The coordinates led Ava deep into rural Pennsylvania, a modest house, isolated, hidden by tall trees and walls of silence. At the gate, a security camera slowly turned, like an eye that never slept. She announced herself with just a name. Ava Linden. He told me you wanted to meet me. The gate opened with a soft click. The last shelter. Inside there was no luxury, just simplicity and care. Plants in recycled pots, maps pinned to corkboards, shelves neatly stocked with food. But the most striking thing, the sound of laughter. Children, some playing with wooden blocks, others reading in an improvised library. Teens and adults too, all with watchful but warm eyes. These were the saved ones. A woman introduced herself as Dahlia. He brought us here one by one, when no one else would, when borders turned into walls. Is he still here? Dahlia smiled sadly. She pointed to the back garden. Ava walked toward it. The house at the back of the property. In a wooden chair beneath a blossoming cherry tree, Harold was watching the sky. I knew you'd come, he said without turning his head. Why didn't you tell me there were more, that you saved all these people? Because the world isn't ready to hear about salvation. It only accepts stories that are neatly wrapped up. She stepped closer. They call you the old man. But I know who you are, and now the world does too. Harold gave a soft smile. I'm not the center of this story. I just stayed when no one else would. The letters. He handed Ava a wooden box with a leather clasp. Inside, dozens of letters with old stamps, some opened, others still sealed. Each had a name, a face, a life saved. I wrote to them, even without knowing if they'd ever write back, just to remind them, and myself, that they were real, that they hadn't disappeared for good. Ava opened one of the letters. It was from a girl named Miriam. It read, Dear Harold, I don't know how you got me out of that place, but I'll never forget your cold hand holding mine. Here, I learned how to grow things. I'm alive. Thank you for staying. What was lost? Harold looked at Ava, his eyes misty but steady. I wasn't a hero. I ran from a lot, stayed silent when I should have shouted, but when I finally understood what truly mattered, there was no more time for revolutions, just for caring for those who were left. Ava sat beside him, recorder in hand. Then let's tell it the right way. She pressed REC, a new recording. This time, it wasn't an expose. It was remembrance. Harold told everything, the names, the faces, the fear and the escapes. Nights in damp caves, codes written with flour and water on dishcloths, escape routes through former Yugoslavia. The time he pretended to be dead to save a mother and her 2 children. And above all, the moment he decided not to return. Being forgotten was the price of saving others. And now, Ava asked, do you want to be remembered? Harold hesitated, then replied, not for me, for them. The final video. Ava edited a new episode, unlike anything she'd ever done, titled The One Who Stayed. It didn't uncover a conspiracy, but a quiet resistance. It told the story of a man who saved dozens without asking for anything in return, who chose to disappear so others could live in the light. The video ended with a quote from Harold, "Heroes don't return, they stay, so someone else can move forward." Released a week later, the video went viral, but not because of scandal, because of hope. Hundreds of comments poured in from around the world. I was one of the children Harold saved. I'm a teacher now. I saw this man in Istanbul in 1998. He gave me bread and a fake name that helped me escape. I didn't know he was real, but now I understand why my mother cried every time she saw a homeless man. Back to the corner. 2 months later, Ava returned to the same street corner. The wooden bench was still there, now bearing a small plaque. For the man who stayed, thank you. A young man was sitting in the spot where Harold once sat. Simple clothes, a distant look. Ava approached, offering a gentle smile. Are you hungry? The young man nodded. She pulled a sandwich from her bag, just like Harold had done for her long ago. You can stay. The world still has room for those who stay. Sometimes the biggest transformations happen away from the spotlight. Not with applause, headlines, or medals, but with quiet choices. With staying when everyone else walks away. With reaching out, even when no one's watching. Harold never asked for recognition. But his legacy lives on, in the names he saved, in the lives he touched, and in the hope that still lingers on a forgotten street corner. If you've made it this far, maybe you felt it too. This story isn't just about the past, it's about now, it's about us. If this story moved you, share it. Not for the scandal, but for the memory. Because sometimes all someone needs is to know that someone stayed. Subscribe to Hidden Past for more true stories the world nearly forgot. And in the comments below, tell us who was the one who stayed for you.